my house for some sort of prop or example, and we're just gonna have to make do with this. And I hope that this looks okay. Okay, we're gonna pretend that this is the back of the trigger frame. So if we're looking on the gun, this is the silver part. Okay, right here. And we're gonna pretend that this paint stick. Coincidentally, I was painting our baby room yesterday, so I have a couple of these. We're gonna pretend that this paint stick is the trigger. Okay, so the trigger, as you go to shoot. Fire. Okay, so I'm going to try to, using this paint stick and this case of paint, show you the best way to set up your trigger. Now, I've personally found that a light and long trigger pull is better than a short and stiff trigger pull. Okay, so a slightly longer trigger pull with low to medium spring tension is better than a stiff and short trigger pull. I don't know why, it just seems to work out better that way. Now, it's personal preference, so you set up your trigger any way you want. I don't give a shit. I'm just telling you the way how I do it. Okay, throughout the trigger pull, I've found a lot of players have a tendency to set their micro switch to shoot at the very beginning of the trigger pull. So what happens is it goes pow, pow. Okay, I definitely do not agree with setting your trigger up like that. Your gun should not be shooting at the very beginning of the trigger pull. One, what's happening is by setting your trigger up like that, you're pushing your screw and you're bending the internals of your micro switch. Your micro switch is designed to basically stop being pulled as soon as it clicks, not to go further and further back. So I suggest setting up your trigger pull in about the middle towards the end of your trigger pull, your activation point. Okay, so as you pull the trigger, pow. So towards the back of the trigger pull is where I suggest you setting up your trigger pull. This way, if your gun is bouncing, you have all this extra room here in the front in case your trigger is moving around after you're shooting, or you have a gun with a lot of recoil, a lot of kick to it. It can bounce around up here, but it's not going to fire until it gets down here. So you always want to set. Usually, what I do is I set my trigger pull, and like I said, I generally like a longer trigger pull. But I don't set. I usually set the activation port towards the end. So as I pull my trigger, click. So my trigger doesn't click until it's down here at the bottom. Then I set a little bit of travel past that point, just in case for whatever reason the screw backs out or maybe the bearing moves or something like that. I like to give myself a little bit of room. I don't like to set it up to where it's at the very back and then click. No, don't like that at all. That can cause trouble. If the bearing moves or the screw comes slightly unscrewed, then you may not be able to pull the trigger. So how to properly set up your trigger pull? I usually like loose and long, and set your activation point towards the very end of the trigger pull. I think you're going to find that your gun's going to be less likely to bounce because the activation point isn't here, where just a little bit of movement on the gun or a little bit of a recoil on the gun can cause the gun to shoot, and it's not at the very, very back to where if your bearing moves or something like that, you're not going to be able to activate the trigger. So by setting your trigger up to fire at the very last part of the trigger pull, like right about there, probably like if this is the first third, the middle third, and the bottom third, in between, probably about 70% of your trigger pull is where it should activate. So if this is a trigger, and as you pull it, click, and then it goes all the way to the back. I think you're going to find that's a great way to set your gun up. A lot of times, if you set your gun up too bouncy, and this happens even with PSP and NPPL, or PSP guns especially, if you set your gun up too aggressive, what can happen is as you're shooting, when you let off the trigger, if your gun is continuing to fire, you try to go back into your bunker, you're going to shoot your bunker, the ball's going to bounce off and hit a teammate. It happens all the time. So by setting your trigger up, one, you're not only going to have more trigger control, you're not going to have to worry about your gun running away, which can dock you in a tournament, but you don't have to worry about shooting your own teammates, and you don't have to worry about your gun shooting when it shouldn't. So hopefully this clears up any confusion about setting up your gun properly debounce. Now, I say lower the debounce until on the one finger fast pull test, you're getting a couple extra shots getting burped out. So and then start raising it. Keep testing. And once you get to the point where it no longer does that, stop right there. You want to stop right there. Now, the reason why you want to stop right there is that if you set your debounce up too aggressively, like say you set your debounce at like 40 or 50, what may happen is as you're pulling the trigger, say you got really fast fingers, as you're pulling the trigger, it may not register all the trigger pulls. It may think that a trigger pull is actually that arcing motion that we talked about at the very beginning of the video. So that's debalance. Like I said, set your trigger up a little bit loose and long is generally better than stiff and short. Set your activation point, the point where your gun fires, towards the very back of the trigger pull. Not at the very back, but towards the back. And do the 3 tests. The 3 tests, which are the, do a light slap on the back to make sure that your gun doesn't shoot. Do the slow pull test. And then also do the 1-finger fast pull test. And between all of that, I think that you're going to see that you're going to have a tournament legal semi-auto gun. It's going to be extremely fast. And you don't have to worry about getting any negative 100 penalties. Thanks for watching.